There is a clock inside you that you have never set, never wound, and never once checked. And yet it has been running since before you were born, quietly deciding when your heart works hardest, when your immune system goes on alert, and when your brain is capable of its sharpest thinking. Most people go their entire lives without knowing this clock exists. And the strange part is, the moment you start living against it, your body's paying a bill you don't even know you're accumulating. Here is the question worth sitting with for a second. If two people eat the exact same meal, sleep the exact same number of hours, and exercise the exact same amount, but do it at different times of day, do they get the same result? For decades, most of medicine assumed yes. Calories, calories. Sleep was sleep. Timing didn't matter, only totals did. That assumption turned out to be one of the more consequential mistakes in modern health science, and the research that overturned it eventually won a Nobel Prize. In 2017, 3 scientists were recognized for uncovering the molecular machinery behind what's called the circadian rhythm, the roughly 24-hour cycle that governs nearly every cell in your body. Not just your sleep. Nearly every cell. Your liver has a clock. Your gut, a clock. Your immune cells have a clock. And when those internal clocks fall out of sync with each other, or with the actual light and dark cycle outside your window, the consequences show up years later as the very conditions we tend to blame on aging, genetics, or bad luck. So let's start with what this clock actually is, because understanding the mechanism is what makes everything that follows make sense. Deep in your brain, just above where your optic nerves cross, sits a cluster of roughly 20,000 neurons called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Think of it as mission control. It receives a direct signal from your eyes about how much light is hitting them, and based on that signal, it releases a cascade of hormonal instructions to the rest of your body. Melatonin rises, cortisol falls, core body temperature drops. That's the evening sequence, and it's designed to prepare you for sleep. Then in the morning, the sequence reverses. Cortisol rises sharply within the first hour of waking, in what researchers call the cortisol awakening response, giving you the alertness and motivation to get out of bed and function. Here is where it gets genuinely interesting, and where most people's intuition about their own body turns out to be backwards. Cortisol has a reputation as the villain, the stress hormone, the thing wellness culture tells you to suppress at all costs. But a healthy cortisol rhythm is not low cortisol. It's a sharp, well-timed peak in the morning that tapers steadily throughout the day and bottoms out at night. That shape, that curve, is what a resilient stress response actually looks like. The problem isn't cortisol existing. The problem is cortisol showing up at the wrong time, or refusing to come down when it should. And this is where modern life starts working against biology that took hundreds of thousands of years to calibrate itself to sunrise and sunset. Artificial light, especially the blue heavy light from phones and laptops, tricks your suprachiasmatic nucleus into thinking it's still daytime long after the sun has gone down. Melatonin release gets delayed. Your internal night gets pushed later than your actual bedtime. Multiply that by years, and you get a population of people who are technically getting 7 hours of sleep, but whose bodies never fully believe it's nighttime while they're getting it. This matters more than it sounds like it should, because sleep isn't one uniform state. It moves through distinct architecture, cycling roughly every 90 minutes through light sleep, deep slow-wave sleep, and REM sleep, each doing a completely different job. Deep sleep is when your brain's glymphatic system, essentially an internal cleaning crew, flushes out metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours, including proteins, when they build up chronically over years, are associated with cognitive decline. REM sleep is when your brain processes emotional experiences and consolidates memory, essentially filing the day's events into long-term storage. If your circadian timing is off, even if your total hours look fine on a sleep tracker, you tend to lose a disproportionate amount of that first, deepest sleep cycle, the one concentrated in the early part of the night. That's not a minor inconvenience. That's your brain's maintenance window getting cut short night after night for years, without you ever feeling like anything dramatic happened. Now here's a fact that tends to genuinely surprise people. Your risk of a heart attack is not evenly distributed across the 24 hours of the day. Large observational studies tracking cardiac events have consistently found a spike in heart attacks and strokes in the first few hours after waking, roughly between 6 and noon. Researchers believe this window reflects a convergence of factors: the natural morning surge in cortisol and blood pressure, increased platelet stickiness in the morning hours, and the physical demand of suddenly transitioning from rest to activity. This is one of the clearest examples of why circadian biology isn't an abstract wellness concept. It has a direct, measurable relationship with some of the leading causes of death, and it's a relationship almost nobody is taught to think about. There's a similarly under-discussed pattern with your metabolism. Insulin sensitivity, meaning how efficiently your body clears sugar from your bloodstream after eating, is not constant throughout the day. Research in chronobiology has repeatedly shown that the same meal, identical in every measurable way, produces a smaller blood sugar spike when eaten earlier in the day compared to late at night. Your pancreas, your liver, and your muscle tissue all have their own peripheral clocks, and by evening, several of the systems responsible for processing glucose efficiently have essentially begun winding down for the day. Whether or not you've stopped eating, this is part of why late-night eating has been associated in multiple studies with higher long-term risk of metabolic dysfunction, independent of total daily calorie intake. It was never only about what you eat. Timing was quietly doing a significant share of the work the entire time. It's worth pausing here to address something honestly, because health content has a habit of overselling certainty, and this is a place where nuance actually matters. Chronobiology is a genuinely robust and still rapidly evolving field. Some associations, like the morning cardiac risk window and the impact of light exposure on melatonin timing, are well replicated across large studies. Others, like the precise metabolic difference between identical meals eaten at different hours, are strong but still being refined, and individual variation is real. Not everyone's chronotype, meaning their natural tendency toward being a morning person or a night person, is the same, and that variation itself appears to be substantially genetic. So none of this is about panic or about treating your daily schedule like a medical emergency. It's about understanding that timing is a variable your body has always been quietly responding to, whether you were paying attention to it or not. Which brings up something psychologically interesting about why this particular piece of biology stays so invisible to most people for their entire lives. Damage from circadian misalignment doesn't announce itself. There's no single dramatic moment where your body clock being 3 hours out of sync causes an obvious symptom you can point to. Instead, it accumulates the way sediment builds at the bottom of a river, one imperceptible layer at a time, until years later you're dealing with elevated blood pressure, or a stubborn 10 pounds that won't move despite a reasonable diet, or afternoon energy crashes that have become so normal you've stopped questioning them, and nobody, including you, connects the dots back to the fact that you've been eating dinner at 9:30 and scrolling in bed until midnight for the last decade. There's a particular population where this becomes especially relevant, and it's worth naming directly. Shift workers, people who rotate between night and day schedules or work overnight consistently, represent one of the most studied groups in circadian research, precisely because their internal clocks are chronically fighting against their actual schedules. The World Health Organization's Cancer Research Arm has classified work involving circadian disruption as a probable carcinogen, based largely on elevated cancer risk observed in long-term night shift workers, alongside consistently documented increases in cardiovascular disease and metabolic syndrome in this population. This isn't meant to alarm anyone whose job requires night shifts, since that work is essential and unavoidable for millions of people. It's meant to underline just how seriously the research community now takes circadian alignment. to the point that disrupting it chronically is treated with the same evidentiary weight as other established health risks. So what actually helps, based on what the evidence currently supports, without turning your life into a rigid schedule you can't sustain? The single most well-supported intervention is remarkably low-tech: morning light exposure. Getting outside, ideally within the first hour of waking, for even 10 to 15 minutes, exposes your suprachiasmatic nucleus to bright natural light at the moment it's most sensitive to recalibrating your entire daily hormonal sequence. Studies measuring this consistently find it shifts melatonin release earlier in the evening, which in turn makes falling asleep at a reasonable hour considerably easier, without needing any supplement or medication. The second is protecting the transition into evening with the same seriousness you'd protect any other part of your health. Dimming lights and reducing screen brightness in the hour or two before bed gives your melatonin system the darkness signal it's been waiting all day to receive. This doesn't require becoming a person who quits technology. Even simple adjustments, like switching devices to night mode or reading under warmer, dimmer light in the evening, measurably reduce the delay in melatonin onset compared to bright screen exposure right up until the moment you try to sleep. The third is consistency itself, which turns out to matter almost as much as duration. Going to sleep and waking at wildly different times across the week. The pattern, often called social jet lag because it mimics the disorientation of crossing time zones, has been associated with worse metabolic markers even in people getting adequate total sleep. Your body doesn't just want enough hours. It wants predictability, because predictability is what allows every peripheral clock in your liver, gut, and muscles to stay synchronized with the master clock in your brain. And the fourth, often the most overlooked, is meal timing consistency. Eating your largest meal earlier in the day, when insulin sensitivity is naturally higher, and giving yourself a longer stretch without food overnight, aligns eating with the window when your metabolic systems are genuinely primed to handle it. This isn't a call for any particular diet or restrictive eating pattern. It's simply recognizing that when you eat is a lever your body has always been responding to, one that most nutrition advice leaves out entirely. What makes this whole area of science quietly remarkable is that it reframes health not as a checklist of foods to avoid and workouts to complete, but as a relationship with time itself. Your body isn't a machine that simply processes whatever inputs you give it. It's a living system with expectations, built over an evolutionary timescale where sunrise and sunset were the only reliable signals it had. Modern life gave us the ability to eat at any hour, work through the night, and stay illuminated 24 hours a day, and our biology simply hasn't caught up to that freedom yet. That gap between what we're capable of doing and what our internal systems are actually built for is where a significant amount of preventable long-term health risk quietly lies. None of this is about achieving some perfect, rigid schedule that leaves no room for a late dinner with friends or a night where sleep doesn't go as planned. Your body is resilient, and occasional disruption is simply part of being human. What the research points to isn't perfection. It's pattern. It's the accumulated weight of what you do those years that eventually shows up as the difference between a metabolism that still works efficiently in your 60s and one that stays sharp through your 70s and one that starts slipping earlier than it needed to. So here's that leaves you. Somewhere inside you, right now, there's a clock that has been running quietly since before you can remember, shaping your energy, your appetite, your mood, and your risk for the conditions that tend to define how well people age. You didn't choose it, and you can't turn it off. But for the first time in human history, we actually understand enough about how it works to start working with it instead of constantly against it. The question isn't whether that clock is running. It already is, whether you notice it or not. The only real question is whether you're going to keep ignoring the signal, or finally start listening to what your body has been trying to tell you the entire time.